Hey there folks, welcome back to my channel. Today I've got a spooky story to share with you all. It's a tale of supernatural encounters in the historic and beautiful city of Salem, Massachusetts. Grab your popcorn and settle in because this is going to give you goosebumps. Now, before I get into the main event, make sure to hit that subscribe button and hit the notification bell so you won't miss any of my future eerie adventures. It was a dark and chilly night in Salem, Massachusetts. I was driving alone on a deserted road when I saw a figure standing at the side of the road. As I got closer, I realized it was a woman, but there was something off about her. She had long, tangled hair that hung in front of her face, and her clothes looked old and tattered. I slowed down, thinking maybe she needed help. But as I rolled down my window, a chill came over me. The woman's eyes were pitch black, like they had no soul. She smiled at me, revealing sharp, yellowed teeth. Her voice was a croaky whisper as she said, "You shouldn't be here." I tried to ignore the fear bubbling inside me and asked if she needed a ride. She nodded and climbed into the back seat, her bony fingers gripping the headrest. As I continued driving, the woman started muttering strange incantations. I couldn't understand a word she was saying. I could feel the atmosphere in the car growing colder, and I could see my breath in the air. I asked her where she wanted to go, and she replied, "To the woods where it all began." I had no choice but to follow her directions. The road grew darker and narrower, and the trees closed in around us. I could hear eerie whispers in the wind, and the shadows of the trees seemed to dance with malevolent intent. We arrived at a clearing deep in the woods. The woman got out of the car and beckoned me to follow. I hesitated, but something compelled me to obey. In the clearing, there was a circle of stones, and in the center, a bubbling cauldron. The woman began to dance around it, her movements wild and unnatural. She raised her arms, and the cauldron's contents began to boil and froth. I knew I had to get out of there, but my legs wouldn't move. The woman turned to me, her eyes blazing with a sinister fire. She pointed a bony finger at me, and I felt a searing pain in my chest. I screamed and stumbled backward, falling to the ground. The last thing I saw before everything went black was the woman standing over me, her sinister smile never fading. I woke up in my car, parked on the side of the road, the woods, and the woman nowhere in sight. I sped away from that place, my heart pounding, and the memory of that night haunting me forever. About a year ago, I decided to take a trip to Salem, Massachusetts. It was right around Halloween, and I thought what a perfect time to finally see the place I've been dying to visit. If you aren't familiar with Salem, it's famous for the 1692 witch trials when several locals were executed for supposedly practicing witchcraft. The first stop on my trip was the Joshua Ward house. They say this is the most haunted home in Salem, which intrigued my interest. The two-story red brick home that stands today is said to be built on the very foundation of a home that was once owned by George Corwin. Corwin was a malicious sheriff who tortured victims of the witch trial. They say this sheriff supervised the murder of Giles Corey, who was accused of witchcraft and punished for refusing to plead guilty or innocent in court. Legend claims with Giles' final breath, he cursed Corwin and the town of Salem. Corwin is supposedly buried in the basement of the house and haunts the residents to this day. Now back to my story. I've always been drawn to the mysterious, so when the opportunity arose to visit Salem, I couldn't resist the temptation to stay in the Joshua Ward house. With its ominous history and countless ghost stories, it promised an adventure like no other. Little did I know just how scary my stay would become. The house's exterior seemed ordinary enough, a grand colonial-style structure with a hint of colonial charm. As night fell and the last few tourists retreated from the town's cobblestone streets, I stepped into the Joshua Ward house. Inside, the air was heavy and the hallway was dimly lit. The dread began to creep in as I ascended the creaking stairs to my room on the second floor. Despite my fascination with the supernatural, I couldn't help but feel a growing sense of unease. I decided to venture into the basement where George Corwin's evil soul was said to be. As I descended down the narrow wooden stairs, I reached an entanglement of forgotten horrors. In the corner, I saw something but could not make out what this was. It appeared to be a dark figure just standing there, no movement. That's when the temperature plummeted. Then, a sensation of invisible hands closed around my throat. Panic surged as I gasped for air, struggling to breathe. My heart pounded in my chest, and I felt an overwhelming terror take hold of me. I was not alone in that basement. I was trapped with the relentless spirit of who I thought could be George Corwin. The room grew darker and an otherworldly voice whispered from the shadows. I couldn't understand what was trying to be said. Out from a dark corner, Corwin's ghostly presence manifested before me. I stumbled back up the stairs, gasping for breath. The vicious presence lingered, following me up the stairs, determined to remind the living of the wicked acts he had committed. That night in the Joshua Ward house, I learned firsthand the price of dabbling in the unknown. The spirit of George Corwin, the wicked sheriff of Salem, still walks those haunted halls, a tormented soul forever bound to the house that bears his name. My visit to Salem and the Joshua Ward house was a chilling reminder that some horrors are best left undisturbed. I was staying at an old Airbnb in Salem, Massachusetts, for a weekend getaway. The place had creaky floors and a spooky vibe, but I didn't mind. One night, I was looking around and stumbled upon a small trap door hidden in the corner of the bedroom. Curiosity got the best of me, so I opened it. It led to a narrow, dimly lit staircase that descended into darkness. I grabbed a flashlight and decided to see where it went. As I made my way down, the air grew colder and the feeling of being watched crept over me. I reached the bottom and found myself in a dusty, underground chamber. The walls were lined with old, eerie paintings of people who seemed to be staring at me. In the center of the room was a small, ancient-looking book. I opened it and the words inside seemed to be written in an unfamiliar language. Suddenly, I heard whispering voices all around me and the paintings on the walls came to life, their eyes following my every move. Panicking, I rushed back up the stairs, slamming the trap door shut. But the voices persisted, echoing through the Airbnb. I could hear footsteps approaching, slow and deliberate, from the other side of the door. I was trapped. Terrified, I looked for another way out. I found a window, but it was barred shut. My phone had no signal and I had no choice but to hide in a closet. The footsteps grew louder and the whispers became more frantic. I prayed that whoever or whatever was down there wouldn't find me. Minutes felt like hours as I cowered in the darkness. Finally, the noises ceased and I cautiously emerged from the closet. The trapdoor was sealed shut and the eerie paintings were back to their lifeless state. I packed my things and left the Airbnb as fast as I could. I never returned to that place and I couldn't shake the feeling that I had uncovered something sinister beneath the surface of Salem. It was a chilling experience I'll never forget. My friends and I decided to take a trip to Salem, Massachusetts, eager to explore the town's eerie history. The witch house, built nearly 4 centuries ago, was on our must-visit list, a place infamous for its ties to the witch trials. To give you a little history on the house, it belonged to Jonathan Corwin, a judge notorious for sentencing 19 innocent people to death by hanging for the supposed crime of practicing witchcraft. Some believed that the spirits of those wrongfully condemned still wandered these hallowed halls, seeking justice, while others believed it was Judge Corwin himself, along with his 4 children who met untimely deaths within these very walls, that haunted the home. As we crossed the threshold into the dimly lit interior, a sense of unease settled over me. We were greeted by the guide, an amiable yet slightly solemn woman who began to recount the grisly tales of Judge Corwin and the accused witches. Listening intently, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were not alone. It started with a faint whisper, barely discernible amidst the guide's narrative, but as we ascended the creaking stairs, the whisper seemed to echo throughout the house. My friends exchanged uneasy glances, but we pressed on, determined to uncover the secrets of the house. As we entered one of the smaller rooms, my gaze was drawn to a portrait of Judge Corwin himself. I began to feel an evil presence, and a sudden gust of wind slammed the door shut behind us, sending the room into a darkness that seemed to swallow us whole. The eyes of the portrait seemed to glow. I began to panic as the whispers transformed into anguished cries. In that moment, I became acutely aware of a presence behind me, breathing on my neck. I turned, expecting to confront some tangible horror, only to find emptiness. My friends were similarly frozen in terror, their eyes wide with a dread that mirrored my own. It was only when the guide's voice broke through the darkness that we began to escape. With trembling limbs and racing hearts, we stumbled out of the house, the weight of the supernatural encounter etched into our very beings. Even now, the memory of that chilling day in the witch house haunts my every waking moment, a reminder of the unfathomable terrors that lurk beyond the realm of the living. A couple of years ago, I was a construction worker helping renovate the Wicked Good Books store in Salem, Massachusetts. The bookstore is said to be haunted. Witnesses have seen books mysteriously fly from the shelves as if they were flung by unseen hands. While renovating, my team discovered something truly disturbing. They had accidentally uncovered a labyrinth of secret tunnels that were under the shop. The tunnels, you could tell, had been closed up for centuries. This discovery intrigued our interest, so some of the guys and I decided we would enter the tunnels and explore. The first time we ventured into the tunnels, I could immediately feel something was off. Our flashlights flickered erratically, casting dancing shadows along the mossy walls. We joked nervously, trying to shake off the sense of fear that clung to the stale air. But as we delved deeper, the laughter waned, replaced by a tense silence broken only by the drip of water and the distant echo of our own footsteps. In the dim light, strange shapes seemed to flit at the edges of our vision, disappearing when we turned to face them. I convinced myself it was just my mind playing tricks, the result of the eerie atmosphere. But then we heard it, a distant whispering that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere all at once. We stopped in our tracks, exchanging wide-eyed glances in the gloom. Was it the wind or something more sinister hiding in the darkness that surrounded us? As we continued, the walls of the tunnel seemed to close in on us, the ancient stones creaking as if they were alive, shifting and resettling with our every step. The air grew colder as my heart began to beat. Then a figure materialized before us. It was the shape of a woman, her features twisted into a mask of sorrow and despair. She reached out to us and I stumbled backward, my heart hammering in my chest. But when I blinked, she was gone, vanished as if she had never been there at all. We pressed on, and in the depths of the tunnel, we stumbled upon a chamber that seemed untouched by time. An old speakeasy where bottles of liquor lined the shelves. Dust hung thick in the air, stirred up by our presence. We approached cautiously, drawn in by the allure of the forgotten. But as we reached out to touch the bottles, they began to fly off the shelves, propelled by an unseen force. The bottles whirled around us, a tempest of power. We shielded our faces, our shouts lost in the chaos. And just as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped, the bottles returning to the shelves with a dull thud. We knew then that we had trespassed upon something ancient and vengeful, something that resented our intrusion into its domain. With a newfound urgency, we retraced our steps, scrambling towards the entrance, our hearts pounding. We collapsed onto the floor, gasping for air, our bodies trembling from the horrors we had witnessed. From that day on, the locals whispered about the construction workers who had dared to disturb the slumber of the spirits that called the tunnels their home. And as for us, we carried the memory of that fateful day with us, a constant reminder of the thin veil that separates the world of the living from the realm of the dead and the dangers that await those who dare to cross it. About 5 years ago, me and a couple of friends decided to take a weekend trip to Salem, Massachusetts. We were all history buffs and fascinated by the notorious witch trials that had taken place there in the late 17th century. Our curiosity led us to delve deeper into the darker side of Salem's past, and it wasn't long before we stumbled upon the legend of Proctor's Ledge. Proctor's Ledge was believed to be the place where numerous accused witches had met their gruesome end at the hands of the paranoid townsfolk. The eerie stories surrounding the area had captivated the imagination of locals and tourists alike. As we wandered through the cobblestone streets and listened to the chilling tales recounted by the locals, a sense of unease crept over us. Despite our initial excitement, we couldn't shake the feeling that there was something sinister lurking in the shadows of this historic town. Determined to uncover the truth behind the legend, we embarked on a quest to find Proctor's Ledge. Armed with flashlights and an old map, we made our way through the winding alleys and misty avenues, guided only by the faint glow of the moon above. The air grew colder as we ventured deeper into the heart of Salem's haunted history. Eventually, after what felt like several minutes of aimless wandering, we stumbled upon a neglected trail leading into a dense thicket of gnarled trees. The path seemed to beckon us forward. We exchanged nervous glances, but our shared curiosity propelled us onward, deeper into the unknown. As we continued through the overgrown foliage, the atmosphere grew increasingly frightening. Despite the mounting sense of foreboding, we pressed on. After what felt like an eternity, we stumbled into a clearing. In the center of the clearing stood an ancient tree, its branches reaching out into the night. And there, beneath its looming shadow, lay Proctor's Ledge. The sight that greeted us was chilling beyond words. As we approached the ledge, the air grew thick with an otherworldly energy, and a dense fog began to swirl around us. Strange whispers filled our ears, indiscernible but unmistakably hostile. Panic seized us and we turned to flee, but the thick mist had disoriented us, rendering escape impossible. Suddenly, from the depths of the fog, shadowy figures began to materialize, their forms indistinct and yet undeniably human. They swirled around us, their ghostly hands reaching out, their mournful wails piercing through the night. We were paralyzed with fear, unable to move as the apparitions closed in around us, their anguished faces contorted with rage and sorrow. In a desperate attempt to break free from the evil grasp, we stumbled backward, our hearts pounding. But the more we struggled, the tighter their grip became, pulling us closer to the edge of the ledge where the condemned had met their grim fate centuries ago. Just as it seemed that all hope was lost and that we would share the same fate, a sudden gust of wind swept through the clearing, dispersing the beings and lifting the fog. We found ourselves gasping for breath, our bodies trembling with a mixture of relief and dread. Fearing the unknown forces that still seemed to linger in the air, we fled from Proctor's ledge, our minds haunted by the terrifying ordeal we had just experienced. As we stumbled back onto the familiar streets of Salem, we vowed never to speak of that night again. To this day, the memory of Proctor's ledge is a chilling reminder of the darkness that can consume even the most seemingly innocuous of places. And though we have returned to our normal lives, a part of us will always remain with the tormented souls that continue to haunt the heart of Salem, Massachusetts. I was in Salem, Massachusetts, staying at a creepy old hotel. The night was dark and the wind outside howled like a wolf. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I climbed into bed, pulling the covers tight around me, but I couldn't sleep. Then I heard footsteps in the hallway. Slow, heavy footsteps like someone wearing boots. But when I looked out the peephole, there was no one there. My heart pounded in my chest as I went back to bed. That's when I saw a shadowy figure at the foot of the bed. A demon with red eyes and a twisted grin. I tried to scream, but nothing came out. The demon whispered in my ear, promising terrible things. I closed my eyes and prayed it would go away, but when I opened them, it was still there, closer now. I could feel its icy breath on my neck. I jumped out of bed and the demon chased me through the dark hotel. I could hear its sinister laughter echoing in the hallways. The lights flickered and the walls seemed to close in on me. I ran into a room and locked the door, but the demon's voice whispered through the cracks. It told me my darkest fears and secrets, things I'd never told anyone. I felt like it knew everything about me. Hours passed and I was trapped in that room, alone with the demon. I thought I would never escape. The room grew colder and darker, and I could hear the demon's voice getting louder, its words more menacing. Just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, the first rays of morning sunlight pierced through the curtains. The demon screamed in agony and disappeared in a puff of smoke. I never returned to that hotel in Salem, but I'll never forget the night I was stalked by a demon. It was the scariest thing I've ever experienced, and I hope I never have to face it again. And that's a wrap for today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you liked this video, don't forget to hit the thumbs up, and if you haven't already, subscribe to my channel for more spooky content like this.